Number 1. So, this happened about 9 or 10 years ago, but I will never forget it. At the time, I was an 11 or 12-year-old female. I was a competitive softball player, and my team was nationally ranked, so we travelled all over the United States to play. This resulted in long car rides, sometimes through the night. One night in particular, it was about midnight, and we were on our way to a tournament in who knows where. I'd been asleep in the car when we stopped at a gas station for a bathroom break. My teammate and I decided to stay in the car while our mums went inside, because we really didn't need to go. A few moments after our mums had left and locked us in the car, I noticed another car in the parking lot. It was a few spaces over, and was the only other car at the station at the time. In this car was a middle-aged man and a little girl who must have been between 6 and 8 years old, who I assumed was his daughter, because she looked strikingly similar to him. I met eyes with the daughter, and she smiled at me. I smiled back and waved, because she was adorable. The little girl then said something to the man, and he looked at me and smiled too. I went back to minding my own business as the man went into the store and left his daughter in the car. When I looked back at the little girl, she was looking at me with a scared look on her face. She started hitting the windows and motioning me to come over to the car. Instantly, my adrenaline went into overdrive. This girl was really acting like she needed my help. My mind was racing. What if this man had kidnapped her and she needed my help? My initial thought was that he was her father, but you never know. I just had no idea what to do. I turned to my friend, who had gone back to sleep, and tried to wake her up, but she just shot me a dirty look and went back to sleep again. Turning back to the girl, I was about to get out of the car and go and talk to her, when I saw she had made eye contact with the man in the store, who was just standing there, watching through the window. He smiled at her and nodded his head. She smiled back at him, and then turned back to me, and instantly went back to trying to get me to come over to the car. After seeing that exchange, I felt like something was off. It seemed like this girl was acting in the direction of the man. I then decided I was not getting out of the car, and would just tell my mum about it when she got back, because, hey, I was aware that I was a little girl too, and what the heck could I do? Next thing I know, the man is returning to the car. He hadn't bought anything, and had basically just been standing in the window, watching the whole time. When he got in the car, they started having a conversation, occasionally glancing up at me. Eventually, the little girl shrugged, and he patted her on the shoulder. They started to pull out of the parking lot, and I glanced at the girl one last time, and saw she was looking right at me, with a huge smile. I was so creeped out, but I didn't tell my mum when she returned to the car, because I was still so confused and shocked about what had just happened. But, thinking back after I had got over the initial shock, I concluded that the man was using his daughter to try and lure me to the car, by making me believe that she was in some type of trouble. Who knows what could have happened next, but my guess is he would have run from the spot where he was watching us, and put me in the car, and drove off with me. The creepiest thing is that it seems so orchestrated, that I'm sure this was not the first time they have done this. Number 2. I was working 12-hour overnight shifts in a nursing home. I was on the general unit that night, and one of the residents was close to death. When I arrived at about 6 PM, I got a report from the day nurse who told me that Mary was circling the drain. She also told me that Mary suddenly had family showing up now that she was dying. Unfortunately, this is very common. Some residents live with us for years, and we never saw a single one of their family members until they were dying. Our residents were all private paying folks that could afford $8,000 to $10,000 a month for high-end nursing home care. The rooms themselves looked like Hilton suites. When someone was close to death, family members would crawl out of the woodwork to prove how much they loved Grandma, and all of her jewelry apparently. Mary lived with us for 4 years, and I honestly didn't even know she had family. Her attorney visited regularly, but he was being paid to oversee her care. I went to meet the family. There was a son and a grandson sitting in the room, and a little great-granddaughter that must have been about 7 or 8 years old, sitting on the floor outside of the room in the hallway. The adults sat in Mary's room, sleeping or playing on laptops, and let the little girl run all over the unit without any supervision. It was a long night. The little girl wasn't afraid of the elderly residents at all. I first caught her standing in another resident's room, stroking the face of an elderly woman. I thought it was sweet that she was visiting other residents, but stepped into the room and asked her to leave. I told her to please go back to her great-grandma's room, and to not go into the other residents' rooms. She smiled prettily and said, "I like the way her skin feels," as she left the room. Okay, so the kid's a little creepy. She goes back to Mary's room, and I go about my duties. I don't see the kid for a while, and it's super late, so I'm assuming they took her home. About 1 AM, I come out of the medication room, and I see the kid standing in the hallway all by herself. She's staring into another resident's room, but not going in. I walk down the hall to send her back to her great-grandma's room once again. This time, I'm really annoyed that her family is letting her run around at 1 AM at her age, all by herself in a nursing home. As I walk up to her, before I can say anything, she smiles at me and asks, "Do you like to touch them?" Completely forgetting what I wanted to say, I just stare at her and say, "What?" She looks into the resident's room she was standing outside of and says, "The old people. Do you like touching them? When they're dead, I mean." I don't even know what to say to this. It's dark, and this kid is creepy. She is way too articulate for how young she looks. When I don't reply, she asks, "Does their skin feel any different when they're dead?" Not knowing what to say to a smiling kid who just asked me if I like touching dead bodies, I just tell her again to go back to her great-grandma's room. She glares at me and looks angrier than I thought a kid could look, but she walks back to her great-grandma's room. Mary died at about 4 AM. I didn't see the little kid again, but I was afraid I would see her in there rubbing Mary's skin. The son and grandson left before the funeral home arrived to take the body, but I didn't see the little girl leave with them. I assume they took her home after we had our enlightening chat about how dead people feel. It gave me the creeps that I never saw her leave. I kept looking over my shoulder the rest of the night for that damn kid. The next morning, I told the same day shift nurse about how creepy the little kid was. She told me, "I'm glad she wasn't here when I was on my shift. I just had the son and the grandson." She swore that the little girl was not there on her shift. I guess she must have arrived after my shift started then. It was as I drove home that I realized that I had not seen anyone else interact with this kid all night except for me. I never saw anyone else talk to her, and I never actually walked her into Mary's room. I also didn't confront her family about the kid's actions, because I didn't want to seem rude complaining about their kid when their loved one was dying. The family had never mentioned the kid at any time when I was in the room caring for Mary, and nobody saw her leave with the son or the grandson. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. Every night at work from then on, I always keep an eye out for creepy little girls. Kids in hospitals and medical facilities, still creep me out to this day. Number 3. Please note that articles about this final story can be found in the description of this video. This story didn't happen to me personally, as it happened right around the time I was born. However, my mother and a number of my other relatives experienced this encounter, and it's certainly spine-chilling enough to write about. In the late 80s, a teenage boy would pass by my family's house every day on his way to and from school. He lived a few blocks away from my family's house. He was never seen walking with another person. According to my mum, he always appeared to be extremely lonely and sad, and she felt really bad for him. He was my cousin's gym locker partner at school as well, and my cousin apparently confirmed the general perception that this kid was very quiet and isolated from virtually everybody. Then, one day, a friend went to visit the sad boy's house, where he lived with his cousin and his aunt. The friend left the house in a panic and went straight to the police department with an interesting souvenir: a severed and skinned human head. The culprits? The sad boy and his cousin. It turns out there was a runaway girl living in their house, and the sad boy suggested over breakfast one morning that they kill the girl. So, they laid down newspapers in the basement, and the sad boy stabbed the girl while the cousin held her still, and then they dismembered her. The cousin even cut off one of her index fingers and wore it as a charm around his neck. Then they showed the aforementioned friend the decapitated head. God knows what prompted her to physically bring the head to the station. Shock can do some crazy things to the human mind. The sad boy's cousin stated that they were involved in devil worship, but that the girl's killing was not part of a ritual or anything like that. They just did it on a whim. It terrifies me to this day that this boy, who, while eating breakfast, came up with the idea of wantonly killing someone, walked by my house every day for several years. I can't stand the profile that lonely or quiet people are dangerous. That is absolutely, utterly untrue. However, in this case, I think the sad boy obviously had some serious issues going on, which contributed to his overall demeanor. Hi guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Video production has been quite slow lately, but I plan on stepping it up again, and I'll have another video for you guys very, very soon. Stay spooky, and remember, the best things happen in the dark.